Again, thank you so much for coming and taking part. Um, I really appreciate it. And today, let's again try to develop some motivation for why we're here, what we're doing, to think about primarily um, how much suffering we're able to see in the world and how much we're not able to see. Um, and taking that into consideration, how nobody likes to suffer. No thing, no creature, let alone no human, likes to be miserable. Um, and or while we are important to ourselves, and we're responsible for our actions, um, objectively, we're like a speck in an ocean of life surrounding us. Um, And so it's good for us to try to think a little bit about what we can do to help alleviate suffering throughout the universe, and certainly throughout the world. And one of the ways we can do that is through becoming um, able to offer respite, either directly, temporarily, or through developing an understanding of the nature of suffering and being able to assist in the freedom from suffering, which is called enlightenment. So the purpose of our practice here is to work on becoming able to offer that guidance, but also offer the actions that are required in order to help, even in a very small way, to assist in the with and the with the removal of suffering, but also the removal of the causes of suffering. Okay, so um, today's so the last few weeks we've been talking about um, suffering in general and the cause of suffering. So these are the first two of the Noble Truths. And Lama Tsongkhapa does not go into the third Noble Truth, the truth of liberation, mainly because two things. One of them is he's assumed we accept that, but also because he's going to be going into far more detail about the liberation and the path liberation in the Mahayana context, which are the next two volumes through the six perfections of a bodhisattva. So what he does here instead is he says, well, regardless, the practices that are shared between the Mahayana and the Theravada traditions, the Buddhist traditions, on in terms of going beyond thinking about future lives, is recognizing the pervasiveness of suffering, even in all the realms of existence and of rebirth in samsara. And he says one of the things we need to do is to consider both, regardless of whether or not we're taking the Mahayana or the Theravada path, the Buddhist path, we need to be able to measure our determination to be free, to be able to recognize whether or not we've managed um, to free ourselves from the entrancing joys of samsara, because this is a measure of our realization, of our understanding, and we can see quite clearly whether or not we've actually got some sort of spiritual realization by the way in which we engage in the world mentally. Physically, there are behaviors we can put on, but essentially, what we're looking really primarily is our own honest self-assessment, rather than trying to sort of show off or anything like that. And he says, so in order for us to even begin to have a solid and grounded determination to be free from this interminable cycle of samsara or suffering, we've got to have recognized the origin of the suffering, and both in terms of its arising from karma and also from the afflictions, mental afflictions of ignorance and coarse attachment and so on, which we've been talking about a lot. So within this scope, he's saying once we recognize that, and if we can also wrap ourselves around how this chain of causality branches across both from moment to moment, but also from life to life in our mental continuum, then it becomes very, very clear to us how it is that the mechanism of the afflictions and karma keep us bound to samsara. Once we've done that, then we really do begin to have this sense of, I don't want to be playing this game anymore. I don't want to be trapped in this eternal cycle anymore. I've had enough of it. And though we might have a simple determination to be liberated, to be free from samsara, we also need to actually develop that. We need to enhance it. We can't just be satisfied with this as an aspiration or an understanding, an intellectual understanding. We need to ground it. He quotes Chandrakirti, who says in the 60 stanzas of reasoning, once we are certain that living in cyclic existence, this continual blazing fire of impermanence is when we recognize that it's like entering into a burning house, then we really begin to want to escape it. We realize that we want to escape it. And he says it's when we recognize that we're prisoners within a prison, then we will be looking for, seeking to find a chance to escape. So when we recognize how we disempower ourselves with our minds, how we destroy our opportunities again and again, how we miss the point again and again, how we fail to seize the moment, carpe diem, seize the moment, seize the day, which is a very Buddhist concept, then it begins to unnerve us, and we begin to feel like, okay, actually, maybe I need to get hold of this, right? So within this, when we recognize we need this escape, then we can increase this understanding from direct experience. It's very easy for us to begin to see evidence of this all around us, and we see it both within ourselves and with others, and we can then use that to actually begin to recognize the sort of the turgidity and the sort of rather complex mess we're in. And unfortunately, of course, this is something that lots of people do naturally. They see it directly, and they have some very negative experiences. And if they don't recognize that there is a path to liberation, if they just feel this is all there is, then they often become very, very depressed, and they see that there's no point in living and so on. So this is a nihilistic view within the Buddhist context. And it's why some of these teachings are quite dangerous if they're taken out of context and just treated as standalones, because if one doesn't feel that there's any way out, then there doesn't seem to be very much point in continuing. But of course, Buddhism does have a way out. So again, he said there's sort of ways in which they look at this, and they say what we don't want to do is to sort of have just a conceptual understanding of this. We need to actually feel it at a deeper root. So again, we need to live it rather than just understand it, and we need to recognize that pervasion of suffering from moment to moment. And there are some various analogies about how if we don't do that, then it has no substance or no strength or no power for us to actually be able to become empowered by our understanding to a point where we begin to start practicing in a legitimate, sincere manner. He says if we don't have this, if we don't recognize this strong desire, which is the Buddhist renunciation, then this desire to attain the path of liberation, to become liberated from suffering, what we really are talking about is not really much more than words or intellectualization or academic. And that's just not interesting. We want to be practicing it. We need to practice this. And he says, if we don't have this, if we don't recognize this, then we can't recognize the suffering. We can't recognize the suffering in others either. And therefore, the quality of our compassion is weakened by it. It becomes only material compassion. It only becomes the compassion for those who are having physical suffering, if you like, or mental suffering, but not pervasive suffering. So we see lots of people recognize physical suffering in others and in the world, and they want to deal with it. They become doctors or psychiatrists or whatever, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But from within the scope of a Buddhist, this is not looking at the deeper, the much more fundamental, the scope of suffering that is keeping us locked in this cycle. So we recognize this cause suffering. We recognize the complete suffering of suffering. We recognize this terrible condition that we're imagining things to be persistent when they're not, suffering of change. And we also recognize this pervasive suffering, which is that we are still bound in this mass. So he says, if our understanding of suffering is intellectual, then our understanding of the Mahayana path is also likewise intellectual. And therefore, to call ourselves bodhisattvas, or to imagine that we're bodhisattva beings without having this understanding is really a bit silly. It's a bit like being missing the point. So we might come to the conclusion, which is, or to the assumption, which is sort of understandable, that as bodhisattva paths, the bodhisattva path is always about staying in samsara in order to benefit other beings, and therefore it might feel that it's inappropriate for us as bodhisattvas when we do have some insight to have a disenchantment with samsara, because we're choosing to be in it. So we have to sort of display a sense of strength and happiness and joy and the need, and in order to meet the needs of others. And so there's one might say, well, that's true, but when we choose the bodhisattva path, we need to sort of have a different approach. And there's a Mahayana sutra which says, were bodhisattvas to fear involvement in cyclic existence, they would fall into a destitute place. So one could understand this as saying, well, the bodhisattvas shouldn't be having these fears. But, and this is what the response from Je Rinpoche about this, and what we were talking about with the three lower realms as well, many months ago, is that from the position of bodhisattva, a bodhisattva mind, is that we recognize this. We have this deep disenchantment with samsara because we recognize what it is. We recognize how insidious it is. We have absolutely no interest in it. It gives no joy whatsoever. The point about it is that what keeps us there is the joy and the hope of being able to assist others. So the joy that is found within, if you like, within a bodhisattva is not from the environment or not from samsara, but with the hope that there's the ability to assist others. And likewise, one could argue that the greater pain for a bodhisattva is the pain of others' suffering. So recognizing the universal suffering is much more painful than the personal suffering that one experiences from moment to moment. And therefore, it's like sort of grimacing, holding on, saying, well, this is not comfortable. Samsara is a difficult place, and many things arise which is not good. But even within that, if the practice is sincere, and the bodhisattva practice is sincere, then also there's a sort of buffer where actually a sincere practitioner feels far less consequences of the karma because of recognizing the dangers of bad actions, poor actions, recognizing the dangers of the afflictions. So in a sense, there's less likelihood of suffering even within samsara as a bodhisattva. However, it's still being, if you like, within samsara. So Je Rinpoche says, yes, this text here is particularly about recognizing joyous perseverance, but also recognizing that if we were to, if we were to fear, to engage in the fear of cyclic existence, we would be engaging in an affliction, right? So we've got to find a way of recognizing the suffering without being terrified of it, just feeling like, this is something that is no longer like fear of a fire. If we want to be firemen, we have to conquer our fear of the fire in order to be able to benefit people within it. Yeah. So quoting Chandra Kirti again, the student of Nagarjuna, bodhisattvas who take on the sufferings of all beings moment by moment until the end of samsara don't fear harm to their body or minds. Bodhisattvas who take on the sufferings of all beings simultaneously until the end of a cyclic existence delight in this activity. Each instant of such joyous perseverance acts as the cause whose effect produces boundless collections of joy across all beings, for all beings. Once we understand this, it is appropriate for them to take all the rebirths that are necessary. So, and he cites this earlier quote that I've just given. So again, it's like recognizing, and the sutra recognizes that cyclic existence should be viewed as beneficial because because bodhisattvas gain happiness proportionate to the effort they make when striving for the welfare of living beings. So not being So when we find texts which talk about the Mahayana not being disenchanted with cyclic existence, it means not being disenchanted with the activities of a bodhisattva which accomplish the goodness of all beings, not to feel any joy within from the objects and phenomena of samsara. And in fact, he says, Je Rinpoche says, the bodhisattvas, the Mahayana tradition, has to have even greater disenchantment of samsara than the Sravaka practitioners, those who do not follow the Mahayana path. And yet, at the same time, because of driven by compassion, which is what I was saying earlier on, driven by compassion, they choose to enter into this burning house, or into this shit pit, as I used to call it, because they are driven to help, right? So Je Rinpoche says, therefore, it's amazing to see that these bodhisattvas, these holy beings, these practitioners, sincere practitioners, see the defects of cyclic existence or samsara and are thoroughly disgusted, and yet they do not give up their vow to help, to work towards all beings because of the great compassion that they hold. And then he says, if those who see the wonders of samsara as some sort of celestial mansion, some sort of amazing palace, and do not reduce their craving in the slightest, and they claim to be serving others in following the path, how could their unwillingness to abandon or feel um, uh, uh, disenchanted by samsara, their unwillingness, how could this be spiritual? How could it be practice? So because bodhisattvas see the faults, the suffering of cyclic existence, that they don't um, that they that they don't remain here because they don't remain here because sorry, they don't remain um, they don't remain in terms of the fact that they are practicing. They do remain in one sense because of the care for others. But so therefore, it's this. I'm not being very clear, but essentially, Baba Viveka is saying exactly the same, which is that it's because of the compassion for all sentient beings that bodhisattvas do not take the road directly to nirvana for themselves. They look much more to achieve the needs of all. Hmm. And Je Rinpoche is saying here, when he talks about the wonders of a cyclic, of a celestial mansion, he's sort of actually referring to some people who do a tantric practice where you imagine that you're in a sort of a pure land, or you recognize, that you're in a pure land and everything, and you enjoy it and you have fun and so on and that, and then you think, okay, because I'm in this pure land, then I can enjoy it. I can have fun in it. I don't need to worry about it. I can just enjoy it. And he's implying it because this is a sutra text. It's not a tantra text. He's sort of slightly implicitly messaging, saying, "No, you're missing the point." And the point is, of course, is that pure land that is being visualized by the people doing deity yoga is such that actually what one is recognizing is not some sort of imaginary beautiful sort of pure land of Buddhas, but actually the truth of samsara. So it's because if we really understand, when we begin to really unpack the Dharma, the Buddha's message, we see it everywhere, right? We see suffering wherever we look. We see the nature of reality. We see impermanence. We don't have to believe anything. We can see it. We can experience it directly ourselves. And when we begin to experience it directly ourselves, then we don't need so much to depend upon the books because we can see it. We can experience it. And at that point, we are seeing the truth of the Dharma. We are actually all phenomena around us, every single thing in the world, everything, every thought, every interaction is Dharma, is pure Dharma. And in that sense, then we enter into a pure land. But that Dharma that we're recognizing is the suffering of samsara, is the impermanence, is the afflictions and the cycle of karma. So these are the things that it's like when we can see them, it's like, yeah, okay, now I can say I've received teachings wherever I go because they're around me. So this is one of the signs, if one wants to know, of entering onto the path of accumulation, of the five early paths, is this ability to recognize the Dharma nature of all phenomena. So so then he's saying again, Jerem Shea, we're on the next chapter 23. So it says then within this week, he quotes an Indian Buddhist called Sri Jagan Mitrananda, who says, while we have sunk into the middle of this cyclic swamp or an ocean of suffering with neither bottom nor shore, we're not disenchanted. When we don't have any fear, we seem to be pleased and excited and interested. What the hell's going on in our minds, is what he says. He says, although we have entered a fire constantly blazing with problems, poverty, hardship in acquiring food and shelter, effort in keeping and finally losing everything, as well as separation, illness, aging, arguments, wars, fightings, we talk about being happy. This seems insane. So this is again quoting him again, Jagan Mitrananda. Alas, the normal people have eyes which are blind. Although we can see the obvious, we don't think about it at all. How has our mind become hardened? How is it that our mind has become so hardened? So he's talking about again this idea of us not really wanting to recognize these basic truths that are available to us. And instead, we wrap ourselves in this cocoon of comfort. And then another, there's what used to be a very popular poem, a Buddhist poem written in India by somebody called Datta, called The Edifying Tale of the Seven Maidens. And it's all about letting go of worldly life, talking of seven women who choose to let go of worldly life. And Je Rinpoche quotes them a lot in this text, in this chapter. And here he says, they're saying, we see the things of the world as wavering images of the moon in the water. Like, you know, there's that English fairy story of the fools trying to rake the big cheese in the water that is the reflection of the moon. And it's like this, is like, you know, they think there's a real cheese there, but it's just an image. It was just an image of the moon in the water. We see attachments as shadows of the hoods and coils of angry snakes. We see these beings to be ablaze with the flames of suffering. So we go to the cremation grounds, delighting in the determination to be free. So we go to the cremation grounds in order to remember impermanence, to recognize what they really need to fear, which is being bound by karma and the afflictions. So he says, so Je Rinpoche says, when we begin to recognize samsara, the environment, the beings, our minds, is just like a moon in the water, impermanent, disintegrating, not resting even for an instant, that sensory objects like the shadows of the bodies of poisonous snakes hold little value but great danger. And that the five types of being, just like gods and so on, and ghosts, are scorched by the blazing fires of the three sufferings, then you give rise to a disposition of the northern children, a disposition that has completely turned away from attachment to cyclic existence. So this is one of my favorite parts of from the Lam Rim, because the northern children is a reference to a part of northern Tibet, where roasted tsampa, roasted barley flour, is scarce, and therefore the inhabitants tend to eat rather a large amount of turnips. So, so, so the story goes, so this is what it's about, is that there used to be a family, large family, that had several children, and they really wanted to have tsampa. Tsampa's, there's like the staple, it's like porridge, but it's, you know, it's what everybody, it's like all bread, it's like eating bread in Tibet. And these children are hungry and they want to eat tsampa, so they said to their mum, please, can we have some food? And she didn't have any tsampa. She's from the, you know, the northern, she's from the north. So she said, here, have some fresh turnip. And they were like, no, I really don't want any fresh turnip. It's a bit like a rabbit. Sometimes they don't want to have the vegetables. So no, we don't want that. So then she said, well, I've got some dried turnip here. And they were like, I don't want dried turnip. So then she said, oh, I can do you some cooked turnip. I've just got some turnip mash on the stove. And they said, no. She said, well, outside there's some cooked turnip that's frozen. So it's like sort of turnip ice cream. Whereupon they all turned away with a sense of, the children turned away with a sense of nausea, saying everything is just turnips. So and then Je Rinpoche explains the metaphor, saying, likewise, with respect to whatever worldly happiness is seen or heard of or remembered, like the Kadampa teachers have said, generate this same feeling, saying this is just the world, this is also the world, it's nothing different, it's not changing, it's just the same old thing. So it's, in a sense, like saying, you know, everything is suffering. Wherever I look, I see suffering, and I want nothing to do with it. Rather like these children who don't really want to eat more turnips. In this way, so he says, by contemplating our previous beginning wanderings through our beginningless wandering through samsara, we become disenchanted, disinterested, and sort of slightly like maybe um, not just not want. I don't want turnips, right? So um, so then we begin to recognize saying, well, that's all there is, unless I do something about it. And at that point, there's a sort of sense of anxiety, which is like, well, why am I not doing something about this? You know, every moment, why it is like, I don't want to eat turnips, but I'm not doing anything about it. I'm just going to carry on having turnips. So he says at this point, when we actually develop a determination which transcends mere words, then we work to actually stop rebirth and cyclic existence. We go and become start to tread on the path to a liberation, either as a Sravaka, where we seek nirvana for ourselves, or as a Buddha, where we seek freedom for all beings. Nagarjuna says cyclic existence, samsara, is like that. Birth, whether in the lands of the deities and humans, the hell beings, the hungry ghosts or animals, the five types of being, is not auspicious. Understand that birth is a vessel itself of much harm, which ends in death. So then Rinpoche says, okay, let's remind ourselves how to do this. We need to eliminate both the two causes. One of them is karma, and the other is afflictions. The karma that we need to eliminate is that which negative karma, right? Um, so between these two, what we know is that if we're able to eliminate our afflictions, then we are not going to be pushed into samsara anymore, regardless of what karma we have outstanding. And the reason for this is because some karma can't ripen if we have an unafflicted mind. So, for instance, once we've conquered our ability to eliminate aversion or hostility, then the latent seeds of hostility that would otherwise arise can no longer arise. Yeah. So, primarily in terms of the path, our focus is on the mind, not on anything else, but with a very strong mindfulness and vigilance regarding our actions, the body and speech, which can slip out because certainly at first, until we're considerably more aware, uh, we are not in control of or not even aware of the state of our mind. So once we have, by destroying our afflictions, we begin through the process of cultivating a path that is complete and without error. If we do not do that, we would just continue to accumulate new karma. So so this is where we're talking about the path, the truth of the path. And he says there are two aspects of this, of the path leading to liberation, the kind of life through which you stop samsara, and the kind of path you cultivate in order to stop samsara. So the kind of life through which you halt samsara is a precious human rebirth, which is what we talked about many moons ago. However, he says, if you have a precious human rebirth, you have this wonderful quality of being a human being with the ability to consider and meditate and act, then it seems quite clear that one must use this opportunity, this incredibly rare opportunity, to work at stopping, uh, ceasing to be stuck in samsara. And again, Jangchuk Rinchen is quoted at this point as saying, now it is the time to make ourselves different from domestic animals. And this idea of being caught in the rat race is not something completely owned by the Tibetans or the Indians. It's something we can relate to. And essentially, it's like often what we find ourselves doing is looking forward to retirement because we're working so hard. Our life is filled with work. And then when we retire, we don't know what to do with ourselves, or we're so tired from having worked so hard that we've got very little time left, and everything becomes very confusing. So he's saying, it doesn't matter how old you are. You could be young, you could be middle-aged, you could be old, elderly, you could be a child. There is an opportunity to do something to help you in your mind, and this is of benefit to all beings, not just yourself. And Geshe Budowa says, for as long as we've wandered through samsara, it's not stopped by itself. Given that it won't stop by itself, we must put a stop to it. And the time to do it is today, when we have these remarkable qualities of a human rebirth. So then Je Rinpoche is now, we're going to have a little bit about, I think, a page or two about how great it is to be a monk or a nun, to take monastic robes. And he says one of the problems about living in a household, running a household, is because there are so many different obstacles to the practice of Dharma, and there are many numerous shortcomings. However, if you're a renunciate, now you don't have to wear robes, but if you're a renunciate, if you've given up a householder's life, then it's very, very easy in comparison to stop samsara. So he says, therefore, the wise, seeing this clearly, should delight in such life. Now, Geshe Damshala, unlike many other teachers, tended to dissuade any of his students, including me, from becoming taking on monastic robes. And he said the reason for this is not because it's a bad idea, but because we no longer live in a culture which recognizes um, the role of a renunciate anymore. There are a few monks and nuns in private orders, but the idea of being a monk or a nun who goes round household to household begging for food is completely unknown to us in our modern world. We just don't even recognize it. So he said, it's just no value to us to do this. Nevertheless, he said, if we recognize the benefits of being a renunciate, we don't need to wear the robes. What's important is the mind. And again, the vows of a renunciate, you can take, or you don't need to take them. You don't need to say, I'm a monk or I'm a nun. One can still live in accordance with them within the lay environment without being too strange. He said one of the great qualities about the Western world, especially the modern Western world, is there's a very large variety of society that's considered acceptable. Now, of course, it depends where you live, but in some places, especially in the big cities, you can be the person you wish to be without much problem. Elsewhere, sometimes the communities are a bit more close, but it depends. And I think he was right. This is right. So in the Jataka tales, he says, it's dangerous for us to consider pleasurable the household, which is often like a prison. Whether we are rich or poor, those of us who dwell in households are generally struggling. When we have wealth, we have all sorts of afflictions to do with looking after it, worrying where it goes, what to do with it, and how to look after it best. Well, others are absolutely exhausted trying to find this wealth, and never find it, feel terribly jealous and angry and upset, and find it hard to know how to pay one bill to the next. So it doesn't matter if you are rich or poor, there's no happiness to be found. And therefore, he says that a lot of these things like this, in terms of the household's existence and the apparent joys, really are just consequences of misunderstandings. And therefore, he says, Je Rinpoche says, therefore, if you are a monk or a nun, then having many possessions and seeking more isn't really your business. It's not what you're up to. If it were, then it would be no different from being householders. So So because it's at odds with, it's complicated to live as a whole household with the practice. Jeremy Shi says it's difficult for us to practice there. Doesn't mean we shouldn't, but it is often much harder. And tax, another to again, Zagala and Bastos Jataka. If you do business in the business of the household, normally it's often unfeasible to refrain from speaking lies. We have to deal with all sorts of things. It's unfair. Sometimes it might be unfeasible not to punish others who do wrong. I have this experience. It's very difficult for me not to tell Centrica, British Gas off for messing me around. I had to show a little bit of what for that. So it's no good. It's like, what are you doing? And put on the rage. And he's saying this is not good. This is one of the qualities of being a householder. You have to do these things. He says again, you've got all these different things you need to look after. You've got all these chores. You've got all these things you must keep, maintain, sustain, manage. It says, looking after all of these things, it's very hard to find any time to do any practice at all. It says religious practice is peaceful and generates peace and harmony, but a householder's aims are often having to be achieved through ruthlessness, through non-peaceful manners. So again, there's this whole thing about what's it called, keeping up with the Joneses, or if you're not in Wales, keeping up with the Smiths or whatever it is, where it's like, what's going on next door and making sure that, oh, they've got a new hut, I better get myself a new hut. This sort of competition thing that's going on, even when you've got two people living in ramshackle huts in the middle of nowhere, they're both looking to see what the other one's got, right? So it doesn't matter. I can imagine that the great millionaires in Hampstead are, oh, he's got, I better get one of those too. A new front door. Oh, yeah, I better do that too. So this sort of owner, like luxury yachts. Oh, it is a big luxury yacht. I need to get a bigger yacht. I need to have a really big luxury yacht. So it's like this sort of thing, right? This competition. This is a householder problem. This is a householder issue. This sort of totally rubbish, really, worldly mind. And this lack of being able to be content with um, thinking about saying, I just need to get on with my practice. It really doesn't matter if I don't have this year's car. I don't have the latest luxury yacht or helicopter or whatever it happens to be, or iPhone or iPad or whatever. Yeah, don't need it. So that sort of mind is beginning to help us, right? But hasn't stopped me from buying the latest iPhone, I guess. But so, these sort of things we need to look carefully at that. And then going back to the tale of the seven maidens, um, they say we cut our hair, we've shaved our hair, we wear clothes from the garbage, the charity shop, I guess, in the modern garbage is the charity shop, and we seek solitude. We only look a short length ahead. We don't stare or eyeball what's going on around us. We keep blameless. We take in our hands earth bowls, simply made earth bowls, and we then go from household to household, seeking alms. We have no interest in material gain nor in fame or veneration. Instead, what we work on are the bramble swamps of our afflictions, and all we are simple recipients of the townspeople donations. And again, is that like they were talking about saying how actually even just a very very minimum, but sustaining health, being healthy, keeping eating, um, but a minimum level of ownership of objects and so on. And the seventh maiden says, when I become attached to my body, I arise from my bed of grass. My clothing is heavy with frost, and then I take whatever humble food or drink there is. Sometimes I am clothed in bed, I am clothed in this soft grass, green like a parrot. I lie down in the front of the tree with what need do I have for the blissful things of this life? And Geshe Bodowa, who was reading this text, he said, because he's a Tibetan, and he said, just a few weeks ago, the snow fell on the roof of our house, and I woke up and my clothes were all frosty, and it made me feel so happy because it reminded me of the story of the seven maidens. And he said, I want nothing other than to be able to practice this way. So Je Rinpoche's, I mean, his do this is very romantic. It's not always very easy, and often you find renunciates, monks and nuns who've brought the world with them. It's not really, it's more really to do with our minds, right? Not to do with living with a grassy bed underneath a tree or visiting cemeteries, right? So it is, again, as Geshe said, there's a beautiful story. It's a really, really lovely written, and they do talk about the attitude that we're developing is important. But we don't need. He said it's crazy to think, okay, I can sell my house and go and live on top of a mountain, because he says, if your mind's not ready, 4 weeks time, you're going to come back and think, what am I going to do now? I've sold my house. I've got to try and find a new house. So it just doesn't work. So the story says, when will we become to know that the animate and the inanimate worlds are like dreams, like hallucinations? They're like a magician's illusions. They're like clouds or a city of the Gandharvas. The Gandharva is known as a smell eater. It's a sort of like spiritual being in India, and the city of the Gandharvas uh, is the idea of where they live, but in fact. It's a way of talking about big cloud cities, cloud castles. So in the cloud castles, where they look like castles in the clouds, but in fact, of course, they're just clouds. And you find this metaphor being used a lot in Buddhist texts where they talk about the city of the Gandharvas. And I thought originally that it was like some sort of strange city, but it's just cloud cities, yeah. So then Geshe Chigawa says, this is the mind training teachers. If there is somebody living as a hermit in the valley of the ascetics, so sort of the valley of not ascetics, but the valley of hermits, then the father has done well, has raised his child well. And then Sharawa says, and this is quite telling, he says, when householders are very busy, monks, nuns, you should go and dress up nicely and visit them. And then they will think the life of a renunciate is very nice. They don't have all this hard work to do. And then this will help to establish a predisposition for the future of becoming a renunciate. Now, in fact, of course, in Tibet, most of the monks, when they come to visit, they're visiting their family. And when they see there's work to be done, they take part, they help. So although Shara was saying, it's not really like that actually in Tibet. Most of the time, the monks are really happy to roll their sleeves up and start chopping wood or doing whatever needs to be done. And this quality, though, this quality of being happy to help, to do anything to help the lay people is really, really strong and noticeable in the Tibetan monastic tradition. It's one of the serious qualities of the monastic life. And again, so sutra, the Householder Ugra Sutra says, if we are householders and we're practitioners, we should be thinking, um, oh, when may I get a sort of, if you like, aspire to being able to let go of the household? It's just a complex, and think, when may I just take part in being monastic, or and just live in a good community? And this way is a way of just keeping awareness of the benefits of renunciate life. But as I said before, this is very. I'm going to repeat myself. Yesterday said, you don't need to really do this. What you need to do is to say, I can actually be a renunciate in a household. Yeah, He said also the way in which money works in the West is completely different from ancient Asia or even Tibet. Nowadays, you can't sort of imagine that you should be begging on others. You need to have your own resource. You need to be able to supply your own basic needs. Then you can maybe think about saying, okay, I can retire or whatever. But of course, this then becomes a complicated, um, never-ending cycle. So it's very, very difficult. It is a real challenge to practice at all in the West. And we shouldn't feel, therefore, that we have no purpose. Of course, there's still purpose there. We do our best, right? So the ornament of Mahayana Sutra says that if we are able to be a bodhisattva who observes the vows of a renunciate, this is going to give us a huge amount more benefit than just if we're a householder. But again, as we said this again. So that's all about being a monk or a nun. So then the next is the kind of path that we need to cultivate in order to halt samsara. Now, it doesn't really matter this way if we're a monk or not. This is the path that we need to walk. And Je Rinpoche starts off and he says there are three trainings, the three high trainings. I've talked about this again and again, three high trainings. And he says what I want to first of all do is to explain why there are three, exactly three, and the order of those three, and then the nature of those three, which we'll be doing next week. So the friendly letter Nagarjuna says, although I find this a bit hard to accept really, but he says, were your head or clothing suddenly to catch fire, you should still set aside extinguishing these fires and just strive to eradicate samsara because there is no higher purpose. I think really it's probably better to put the fire out and then you can carry on your practice. I mean, he makes a point, but I think it's a bit extreme possibly. Anyway, and it says but the next verse is through ethical discipline, concentration and wisdom, we may achieve nirvana, the undefiled state of peace and restraint, ageless, deathless, inexhaustible, free from all the elements and problems, right? So the certainty, and is going to now go to this, the certainty of the three aspects, the stages of the disciplining the mind, the results and the objects that they eliminate. So the stage of eliminating the mind, so this is disciplining the mind rather, this is related to ethical discipline. And he says these three trainings bring to completion all the tasks of the yogis and yoginis, practitioners, sincere practitioners. And what it does is it makes a distracted mind undistracted. Whereas the training in concentration or mental training balances the unbalanced mind. The training in wisdom liberates an unliberated mind. So the results of ethical discipline that is not degenerated, that is sustained, is happy rebirths, either as a deva in the sort of God realms, or as a human. And this is from ethical discipline, right? So the first of the three trainings. Whereas if it's degenerated, then it's rebirth in the lower realms. The results of training the mind are the happy rebirths of the high deity, the high devas, which is the form and the formless realms, the meditation realms. And the result of training in wisdom is liberation, freedom from samsara. So in brief, Je Rinpoche argues, the three trainings are the two goals: high status as a human or a deity, and the certain goodness of liberation. And because the first two, the former is twofold, in other words, there are two types of high rebirth. There's rebirth in the desire realm, and then the form and formless realms, or the form realms. So formless realms basically are very, very different, qualitatively different in terms of experience and nature. Formless realms, there's no body. Um, uh, and essentially they are only available to meditators. They're a very, very, very refined form of meditation. And therefore he says, because the results of these two are different, the desire realm and the non-desire realm, the formless realms are two, then the first two trainings are twofold as well. And and therefore and there is only one path to liberation. That's the third. Therefore we have the three trainings. So this is the way in which we can establish certainty of the three, if you like, in one sense. But there is also the order in which they're taken. So also that's how they work. So the objects that they eliminate. So again, in terms of the three higher trainings, what they eliminate is in accordance to whether or not they eliminate how they eliminate the afflictions, our broken mind. First, by weakening them. We weaken them through um, um, through ethical discipline. Secondly, through uh, um, being able to deal with them and being able to empowered enough to be able to deal with them. And this is through meditation. So we have the ability to see them arise and then change them or modify them or stop them accordingly through meditation. And this is why meditation gives us this vigilance and this flexibility to be able to stop right at the beginning, falling into a cycle of grief. And then lastly, or a cycle of like fury or whatever. And then lastly, insight eradicates the very seeds of these afflictions and prevents them from recurring. So this is looking at the three higher trainings in terms of how they work to eliminate our afflictions. And then lastly, the order of the three trainings is demonstrated through a sutra called which itself is then quoted in the levels of yogic deeds, which I think is Sangha. Ethical discipline is the root. Concentration is the delight and the serene state of mind that depends upon this steady root. So we need to have a firm platform from which we can meditate. Otherwise, if we aren't able to control ourselves, we certainly won't be able to control our minds. If we have allowing agitation to arise, then we'll never be able to develop serenity. So serenity is only available through having a basis, our foundation in ethical discipline or mindfulness and vigilance, right? Concentration is this delight in serene mind. And then wisdom provides us with the insight which cuts through and actually transforms us into enlightened beings. But that wisdom needs the power of the concentration, the strength, serenity, to get deep into our innate preconceptions, right? So into our unconscious, so we can go right deep into the very, very deepest part of our minds and clear off our preconceptions and our assumptions. And this requires an incredibly powerful concentration to do that. And this here is why we need these three. And Je Rinpoche explains that ethical discipline is the root because the other two grow from it. Concentration, the second of the three trainings, depends upon discipline and takes pleasure in putting the mind into this equipoise. Wisdom, the third, depends upon both and then destroys the view which keeps us bound to samsara and gives us the view which transforms us into the noble beings, Arya beings, who see reality exactly. And once we see reality exactly, most of our problems are gone until what we then do is we concentrate on it more and more and more until we see it so clearly that there's nothing left. There's no seeds left. And then we're Buddhas, more or less. It's a bit more, but only a little bit more. So that's that. I think it's a little bit early today, but I think we'll call that a day. And then next week we have a how to practice the three higher trainings, which is the last chapter of book one of volume one, and the end of the middle scope, or the, if you like, the main part of the pyramid. And then the remaining two volumes, volume two and then volume three of this, are on the apex of the pyramid, and the first is on the Mahayana, how to enter into the Mahayana, how to develop bodhicitta, and then also the first four of the four perfections, which are beautiful, lovely, lovely, lovely teachings. And then the final volume is developing concentration and wisdom. So the last two of those three higher trainings. So with the bodhisattva practice, the Mahayana practice is known as the six perfections. Normally we talk about the six perfections of a bodhisattva, and those six perfections, the first four, which is in volume two, this one here, are is ethical discipline within the three higher trainings we're talking about. So the ethical discipline is established. No, sorry, I stand corrected. The first three are ethical discipline, which is giving, ethical discipline, and tolerance, patience, right? These are the three that we come next. And then after that, there's joyous effort and concentration belong to the meditation, or the second of the three highest trainings. But most of the emphasis in Lam Rim is on how to concentrate, how to develop our minds. And then the third, and then the last, the big chunk of the third volume is on insight and developing wisdom, understanding that actually cuts through to and liberates us from samsara. So that's what we've got to look forward to. We've got just to first of all, we have an overview of the three higher trainings, which Je Rinpoche, which we'll go through next week, and then that's that. Okay. So yeah, I'm a bit early, but that's all right. So let's dedicate any benefits from contemplating, from teaching or considering, from learning, and from our own determination to make a difference in the world, such that, and put all of that together into a genuine wish that we may transform ourselves, or to empower ourselves to the position of being able to give all beings everything that they need, through achieving the highest aspirations we can of becoming a Buddha or being enlightened. And the whole purpose of this is to benefit all beings. So okay, and then let's as ever, when I remember to let's meditate a little bit. And choose any of the topics we've covered, or also on or just on the breath, especially if it's been a long day.